Hi, welcome back to History with Abby, with me, Abby, talking about history, drinking beer, but out of a mug today because I felt like being a bit more professional. I'm sorry that the continuity is just way off in this video. If I'm honest, I've struggled in the past few weeks of lockdown. The motivation has not been there, the depression has, so this has taken me a few weeks to actually film, and there's only so many times that I can try and pretend that it was all in one sitting. So I've given up now. But yeah, that's fine, you know, we are ending the stigma towards mental illness and making history accessible and engaging, so good for us. This is a topic that I've already done before. I did it when I didn't have a very... I can't believe I'm saying this, have a very big following. I just think it's such an incredible story and I want to be able to tell it to as many people as I can. This is an educational post, but it's also a bit of a story about an experience I had with a research project that kind of changed my life in a way. This episode is about war, it's about football, overcoming discrimination, me crying in a Wetherspoons in Kent for about 2.5 hours, and some other stuff probably. So join me. Let me tell you the story of a man named Walter Tull, the first black officer in the British Army. Walter Daniel John Tull was born in Folkestone, Kent in 1888. His father was from Barbados and his mother was British. When Walter was 7 years old, his mother died, and 2 years later so did his father, leaving his stepmother to look after 6 children alone. Unable to cope, she sent Walter and his brother Edward to live in an orphanage in Bethnal Green, East London. 2 years later, Edward was adopted by a family in Glasgow, leaving Walter without any family. As a way to cope with his loneliness, he joined the orphanage's football team and was a keen footballer from a young age. In 1908, Walter won a trial with local amateur football team Clapton FC and was in their first team within 3 months. His talent was quickly noticed by larger football teams, and in 1909 he was signed with Tottenham Hotspur. Hotspur. Dad, is it Hotspur? This made Walter only the second ever black professional football player in England and the first ever black professional outfield player. The first ever black professional player was a man named Arthur Wharton. In 1889, he was signed to Rotherham FC as their goalkeeper. Being one of the only black football players at the time, it's unfortunately unsurprising that Walter received a lot of discrimination. Things particularly escalated during a match with Bristol City in October of 1909, when fans were shouting a lot of abuse at Walter while he was on the field. Rather than supporting him, the event embarrassed Tottenham so much that they dropped him to the reserve side, and he was eventually transferred to Northampton FC. Northampton's manager only saw the greatness and talent in Walter, and he played in 110 matches with the first team, becoming one of their most celebrated players. Walter's success with Northampton caught the attention of Rangers, and he was close to signing a deal with them when war broke out in 1914. Walter's last football match was in the autumn of 1915, and by November, he was fighting in France. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the regiment that Walter was a part of in the First World War. After the outbreak of war, sports associations were criticised and came under fire for distracting young fit men from joining the armed services. This was at a time when Britain was actually one of the only countries in Europe not to implement a system of conscription, where enlistment into the army is mandatory, and players and fixtures were criticised for ignoring their greater duty and instead using their skills to serve their country. So after a mounting pressure, the Football Association and the War Office established the 17th Battalion Middlesex Regiment. And it was more commonly known as the Football Battalion because it was made up of football players from around the country, but it was also open to fans, and so it was kind of used as a propaganda tool to appeal to young men with posters like these. And these posters would be put around football matches and football grounds, and you know, they would say things like, you want to meet your favourite football player? Well, we can do one better than that. Let's go work with them, go to war with them. And it worked. I'm not particularly interested in football, and when I say particularly, I mean at all. But this is a super fascinating story, and I know that there might be some of you who are really interested in checking this regiment out. So I've included a link below to where you can read about the regiment. It was made up of professional players from Chelsea, Arsenal, Crystal Palace, the other ones, During Walter's military training, he was promoted 3 times and sent to France as a lance sergeant. From October to November of 1916, Walter fought in the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme took place from July the 1st, 1916 to November the 18th, 1916. In a 4-month time frame, it killed around 420,000 British soldiers, and in total, 1 million of the 3 million troops that fought were killed, making it one of the deadliest battles in history. I don't have time to go into detail about the battle, but I've included a really helpful video by Epic History TV. So Tull survived the Battle of the Somme, but as a result developed severe trench foot and shell shock. Shell shock would today be defined as post-traumatic stress disorder, but at the time it was believed that soldiers developed these symptoms as a result of artillery shells exploding too near them. Walter was sent back to England to recover. While Walter was preparing to return back to the front line, he was surprised to find out that his orders had changed. Instead, he was to be sent to Scotland. Walter's superiors had been so impressed with him that they had recommended him to be sent to training corps to become an officer. What's so crazy about this is that it went against military regulations of the time. The 1914 Manual of Military Law forbade any soldiers of colour or soldiers not of pure European descent from ever holding a rank higher than sergeant. Walter had made such an impression on his fellow soldiers. They trusted him, they respected him, and they valued him. So much so, his superiors decided to go against this rule. So this is an image of Walter alongside 2 fellow training officers at the training corps. Obviously, I don't know the reality of what was going on. I only know what I interpret this photo to be, but I think that there's something so harmonic to it. In May of 1917, despite the fact it was technically illegal, Walter was commissioned as an officer of the British Army. From November 1917 to March 1918, Lieutenant Tull served on the Italian front. It was during this time that he led 26 of his men in a night raid against an enemy position. They crossed the river Piave River into enemy territory and all returned unharmed. This is the first known instance of a black man leading all white British troops into battle. His commanding officer, Sidney Lawford, praised Walter for his gallantry and coolness during this raid and recommended him for the Military Cross Award. Walter never received this Military Cross, and that's possibly because it would have humiliated the army to award it to a black officer. There's still a campaign going on today to give Walter and his family the Military Cross that he deserved. On the 25th of March, 1918, 2nd Lieutenant Walter Tull was killed by machine gun fire as he tried to lead his men into retreat before the German advance. Former Leicester goalkeeper, Private Tom Billingham, stayed with Walter in the 2 minutes it took him to die. Several of his men risked their lives trying to retrieve his body under heavy fire so that he could have a respectful burial, but they were unsuccessful. Their actions show the respect that they had for their lieutenant. His body was never found, and Walter is one of thousands of soldiers from World War I to have no known grave. Walter Tull played many roles in his life, and he fought adversity in all of them. A football pioneer, a wartime hero, and a largely unknown figure in British history. His story of resilience and bravery is one that should not go unheard. So this portrait was taken of Walter on the day that he was commissioned as 2nd Lieutenant. This portrait is the reason that Walter Tull's story means so much to me. So I first came across the name Walter Tull about 1 month into my museum curation masters. We had to pick an object of our choice and acquire it for a museum of our choice. I was looking into how soldiers of colour have been represented in military museums. So I'm reading about his life and I'm like, wow, I've never heard of this guy, ever. And that's exactly why I should pick him for this assessment. So I was like, okay, cool. So I'll just get like a photo of him or something. So I come across the Walter Tull archive. I have a phone call with the great niece of Walter Tull, who is one of the people that runs the Walter Tull archive. It's such an amazing experience to speak to the relative of this person that I've been doing all this research about. It was just amazing. He wasn't just suddenly a figure that didn't exist in relation to anything else. Here I was talking to his relatives today. I see on their archive this portrait, and Walter's great niece says to me, oh, okay, well, good timing, because the photo is actually on display in a temporary exhibition on Walter Tull's life at Folkestone Museum. By this point, seeing it in person wasn't actually going to help my assessment in any way, but, you know, any excuse to spend a day going somewhere that's not the library, I was like, cool, let's do it. Get on a train, 3 hours to a town in Kent that I've never heard of before this. I get to the town's local museum. The staff is so friendly, so helpful. They take me to the exhibition room, say, okay, well, here you go, enjoy. I I see this portrait and I just burst out crying. And I don't really know why, but looking back on it, I think that I started crying because seeing that portrait made me realize, yep, this is what I want to be doing. This isn't just a, God, I don't want to be an adult yet, so I'm going to do this for another year. This is it. So I see this portrait, cry a lot.
You also put on a Tottenham football kit.
That was over a year and a half ago. When I think back to that day, I still get goosebumps. It wasn't about the assessment anymore. Couldn't even really be bothered with the assessment. All I wanted to do was talk about Walter Tull, learn more about him, see more photos of him. So I leave the museum and I obviously go straight to the Spoons. Oh, and the Spoons is in this old church. It's just amazing. I sit down and I just cry. I'm overwhelmed, angry that I'd never heard of this guy before, but mostly I was just inspired. And I did an Instagram story and I just said, oh, here was my day. Here's some stuff about this guy. And I got a lot of responses from people saying, this is cool. Yeah, you should do this more often. And that's the reason that I'm doing this right now. So if you were one of those original people that watched that story, and if you're watching this now, I can't even put into words how much I appreciate the support that you gave me. I knew that this was going to get emotional. So about the Walter Tull archive. I think it's so easy to put the word archive with this big kind of catalogue in a big building. This consisted of a collection that was looked after by relatives of Walter Tull, and it was kept within the home of one of the relatives. So it was really cool to engage with a different kind of archive than I had really thought about before. And that showed me there are all these photos and letters that so many families have that tell such incredible stories. There are so many individual acts of heroism that go unnoticed in grand narratives, and we owe it to these people to uncover them and to share them.
So yeah, that's everything.
Shout out to Folkestone Museum, who were so friendly and accommodating. Shout out to Phil Vasili, whose biography of Walter is the main source used in this video. Shout out to the Walter Tull Family Archive, who, in agreeing to speak to me, made this such a special story to me. Shout out to Walter Tull, obviously. And shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you liked it. See you soon. Bye.